And we are officially at our time. So let's go ahead and begin. Welcome, everyone. We may still have some folks joining, so don't be alarmed if other faces pop into the screen, or folks might be watching this as a recording. But welcome to our Within Teacher community conversation. Today, you've got three amazing instructors, myself and Shira and Jonathan, and the topic that we're going to be exploring today is thoughts and beliefs. And the teachers were talking just a few moments ago. We all have so much we want to share about this, but just to get started, if you are new to Within, welcome. We're an online meditation studio. We offer classes from many different traditions, and our student community is located around the world. So welcome and glad that you're here. And to get us started, I want to invite our teachers to introduce themselves, to share who they are, maybe where they are in the world, and something about you that anything that you would like to share. Who would like to be? I see Shira off mute. So let's go with Shira first and then Jonathan.
Yeah, hi, my name is Shira Appell. I am currently located in Marin County in California, right north of the Golden Gate Bridge. And I am a meditation teacher, and I teach Tuesday mornings at 8:30 a.m. PST. And I teach a class on quieting the inner critic. And I'd say that that is where a lot of my curiosity and interest lives right now. I am a psychotherapist practicing in the Bay Area, and I got involved in meditation before I became a therapist. And it was actually, I think, what helped me journey in the direction of psychotherapy. I was able to use meditation to kind of connect with my own inner wisdom, inner knowing that lives underneath the thoughts and beliefs, and was able to kind of see that my passion was in really supporting people in their safety and emotional safety, and helping them to be curious about what goes on for themselves in their day-to-day lives. And I think meditation fits in nicely, and I do use meditation in my practice. So I'm really excited to be here to talk more.
Thank you so much, Shira. Jonathan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jonathan. I'm right now in Ukiah, California. It's about 2 hours north of San Francisco in California. And I came here in 2016 to start and nurture a residential mindfulness community, envisioning a community that lived together and practiced mindfulness together, and operated the retreat center that we live at called the Mariposa Institute. And so we've been stewarding a community called the Sugar Plum Sangha since then. I actually became involved in a way with Within around the same time. While we were starting our community, we were looking out into the broader community to see what else was going on. And we met Tasha, and not Tasha, I'm sorry, Hannah, and we had coffee together, and we just kind of felt like peers, and for a while doing our own separate things, until about a year ago, I reached out to Hannah about joining and collaborating to offer some classes. So I don't have a regular teaching slot now. I did until last October, but I gave that up to go on a 3-month retreat. And since I've got back in January, I've been subbing here and there. So I do my best to kind of recreate the class that the regular teacher offers when I sub, but I can't help but add my own twist to it. When I'm teaching my own classes, I really like to focus on accessing our innate joy and resilience through concentration, and guided to that state by some of the early Buddhist practices. I originally discovered meditation. I was in college in 2005, and going through a period of, let's say, suffering in my life. And the book that I discovered in a class on Eastern religions by Thich Nhat Hanh just really spoke to me. So I'd been exploring meditation and Buddhism since then. I have gone in and out of several traditions, but I've always been very deeply rooted in the Plum Village tradition, which is the teachings and practices that have been transmitted by Thich Nhat Hanh. And so I became an ordained member of that community in 2013, and since then have been spending lots of time in monasteries and supporting lay communities out in the world.
Thank you so much. And I am Kim Nicol. I live in San Francisco. I'm a certified life coach and meditation teacher. And meditation and mindfulness for me, especially as it relates to the thoughts and beliefs that we're going to talk more about, was incredibly transformative in my own career path, in my own life journey. I started meditating maybe just over 10 years ago with a small community here. And I began to notice, I have all these thoughts in my mind and they're there all the time. And similar to what Shira was talking about, some of them are the self-critic ones, and starting to notice, it's like there are kind of different layers or different voices. And it's fascinating to simply notice. Like, so many teachings are about watching the thoughts, watching the mind. And I found that as I did that and started to see just all of the chatter, all of the noise, once I could see it, I could then begin to question it. I could then begin to notice, like, what is the effect in my life when I'm holding this thought? Whether it's a story about myself or a story about the world, or, just the way I would talk to myself about my life. It was fascinating. And so that sort of kicked off in my life this really deep inquiry and reflection. I ended up leaving one career, becoming a coach, and now getting to do this cool blend of, there's the meditation teachings, and then separately I coach people on how to create different stories and different choices for themselves. But coming back to this idea of thoughts and beliefs, and I'm really interested in hearing Shira and Jonathan share their wisdom and their perspective on this. And maybe the place to begin with is, like, what is a thought? Like, what is a thought? What is a belief? Like, how do the two of you think about this? And why is it important for us as humans, as meditators? Who would like to start?
I think of thoughts and beliefs in relationship to each other. So a belief is just a certain kind of thought as I experience it, or at least as I've learned to experience it. Actually, for me, these kinds of mental formations are easy to understand when I am able to see clearly, what they are not, especially with a belief. So the typical way that I have thought about a belief in the past was this thing that I hold and carry around with me, something that kind of exists somewhere in my mind, like it's stored away in a file cabinet, even when it is not particularly relevant to the moment. Actually, we think about memory a lot in the same way, that memories are something that we have and we store them away, and then we pull them out in the appropriate moments. When actually research shows anytime you access a memory is actually reconstructed there in that moment. We don't save memories like bits on a hard drive to open like a file. They get they get refabricated in every moment. And that's one reason why memories are not really trustworthy sources of information, if you've ever noticed. And beliefs are actually much the same. And recognizing how a belief gets recreated in every moment, for me, helps to lessen my attachment to them and to weaken my identification with them, which is really core and central to the kind of awakening that the Buddha taught, and the kind of awakening that I'm interested in, was that our attachment to our beliefs, our identification with beliefs, holding on to a piece of grammar that's supposed to represent the world as me, as mine, as somehow core central to what I am, is what causes a lot of suffering between myself and other people, and also just in myself. It can be the source of a lot of anxiety and uncertainty. So for me, meditation is recognizing a belief or a thought forming in the moment and seeing it as just another appearance in consciousness. One of the really ground shaking insights of meditation for me is that all the stuff that happens in my mind is just another realm in the realm of the senses, like a sound or like a sight or like a smell. It's just something that appears in my consciousness. And when I'm really watching that happen, the experience of thinking something or of believing something is no different than the experience of hearing something or seeing something. It just arises from a sense organ contacting a sense object. So in the same way that I wouldn't identify with the sound of the birds chirping outside, or the lingering taste of coffee in my mouth right now, it doesn't make any sense to identify with the random things that just pop into the mind.
Shira, what are your thoughts about thoughts and beliefs?
Well, I was very interested in listening to Jonathan's kind of thought process around it. The irony is not lost on me how we are currently thinking as we talk about this. I think I begin to think about this conversation again, also in the place of what they are not. And you know, in my work with clients, I think that the most common misconception around thoughts and beliefs is that they are fact. And I think a lot of my work revolves around helping people to understand and to be able to see them as separate entities that may come and go. I think thoughts are more in the moment, minute by minute. And I think beliefs are accumulations of thoughts. Over time, I think thoughts kind of combine and meld together with experiences and the feelings that we feel in moments. And particular feelings might inscript a certain thought or belief into us more deeply than others. And so I really believe that beliefs come from this combination of the way that our nervous system responds in a particular moment in time, the feelings that originate there, the reactive response that occurs alongside the thoughts. And with all of those in combination, I think they create sometimes more deeply held, less deeply held belief that comes forward at different times in life after that point, and I think continues to kind of tattoo your being with this original experience. And so I think that beliefs are things that develop over time, and they're kind of constructed based on those experiences, thoughts, and behaviors. Yeah, that's how I kind of begin to think about it. There's a lot more.
Yeah. And also to mention to those of our community who are joining live, you also have the chat available. So if you have a question that you have, as we're talking, you can just drop a question in the chat and we'll see it. What I'll share around how I approach thoughts and beliefs is, I love what Jonathan mentioned, the grammar. I can't remember exactly what you said, but it was something like, we attach to the grammar, like to the language of a thing. And that really speaks to me as I was listening to you both. I think for me, a thought it's like a narration. There's something necessary about the language that is separate from like the sensory experience. So I can have a sensory experience of the sunshine, like landing on my skin, and then I can have a thought about it, which is it's too hot. Or, oh, did I put sunscreen on? Like the narration that I have about the experience is the thought part, separate from like the physical sensory experience of it. And I think of a belief is simply a thought that I agree with. And so when we're born, we're surrounded by other humans. They offer us all kinds of thoughts, all kinds of ways to narrate and explain the world. And the ones that we agree with become our beliefs. So I think this is one of the ways that beliefs kind of move in the world. It's just a thought and you're like, yeah, I agree with that. Like, I agree. It's like, I believe that waking up early in the morning and making your bed is what good people do, right? It means something about me. I identify with it. It's just a thought, like just a sentence, just a narration of my world. And as long as I agree with it, then it becomes a belief. And I think this is why, like with a lot of the work that I do, part of it is first raising the awareness of what are the thoughts that you have and are you agreeing with them? And this might be something that you both have seen too in your roles as teachers, but we can have these stories that we do identify with, or these beliefs that we really get attached to, or a sense of identity that we think, oh, like this is just true with a capital T. And, my past is this, or I am this. And I feel like that's so fundamental to all of the meditation traditions, right? Is how do we learn to discern between the arising story that we create in the moment, and how do we recognize that as, an illusion, maybe a functional one, maybe a dysfunctional one, it kind of depends. But I think that's where, kind of what can initially seem very esoteric and kind of like, out in the sky, right? Like meditation actually becomes incredibly practical and useful for being alive with other humans. Right. So those are my thoughts about that. We have a list of really great questions also that came in from before. So I'm going to ask some of those too. I'd love to ask you both. Maybe we'll start with Shira on this one. Can you speak more about the relationship between emotions and thoughts and behaviors?
Yeah, this is another one of those that I think a lot of scientists have kind of been exploring, and cognitive behavioral therapy is an attempt at working with these. And I do think it's sort of like a chicken and the egg situation. Like, I think that they kind of run in a circle, and it's kind of difficult to identify where the beginning was. And so, I think it's really important that we look at, and I think just the lens through which I bring my, I don't know, self into the world is through really looking at feelings as the initial branch off place, but other people start in other places. So I think it's all about identifying where within you is what feels to be the core, what feels to be the foundation. But I think when we look at feelings, thoughts, and behaviors, I think that we begin with, you know, what's most readily available to us. You know, I often think about feelings as being this heart founded place where there's knowing, there's wisdom, there's intuition that if we can land there, and I find that meditation is a really helpful tool to help us land there. If we can land there, we can identify where all of it's coming from. And from that place of, well, I'm feeling fear or I'm feeling sadness, we can begin to identify, well, what are the thoughts that are created from that feeling, from that emotion? And the thoughts we can identify as maybe more of an illusion if we can see that the feeling is kind of creating that foundation to kind of rev up those feelings and get them moving, or to rev up those thoughts and get them moving. So feelings, I find, come in, drive us towards particular thoughts, which then drive us to take action on those thoughts, to participate in certain behaviors. And I think beliefs are just an extended version of that pattern. So I think it's really important that we can utilize practices, whether it be journaling or meditation or therapy or other practices, to identify what it is that we're feeling in a moment, and whether that feeling is creating particular thoughts, and whether those thoughts are then kind of forming the behaviors that we do regularly, day in and day out.
I think that's super interesting. I want to respond to that a little bit. And one is, I think it's fascinating that the word feeling means both emotional experience and also physical sensation. So like when you talk about how everything is so connected, I think that really speaks to that. And the other thing that came to mind is I've heard it said, I can't remember where, but like humans are like feeling creatures, and then the intellect steps in to come up with a justification or an explanation for the emotion. And this is often in the context of buying behavior. Like we see, cake in the grocery store and we think that cake looks so good. Like, I want to eat that. Well, I shouldn't eat it. Well, and we like talk ourselves into things. Like we can have a whole dialogue with ourselves because we're feeling something. And then we go into the mind space to try to explain it or justify it or rationalize it. So that's something that came to mind in terms of that relationship between like feelings, thoughts, and then behaviors, and kind of like it is a very interconnected, very dynamic loop.
Yeah, I think that speaks really well to that experience. And I think that when we can really allow ourselves to have the emotional experience, because I think people have a lot of fear about going into the emotional place. And I have a lot of thoughts and beliefs around, what we take in terms of nourishment and nutrition as it relates to that. But I think, yeah, when we find that initial reaction, it's really important that we pause. And that's where I think meditation really helps us to be able to distinguish apart what are the feelings, what are the thoughts, and are we believing those thoughts? Are we trusting that those are real? And can we get curious to see if perhaps there's some maybe stuck places there that we can kind of expand and pull apart?
Jonathan, what are your thoughts about this, either from your own practice or from how you see your students questioning the relationship of thoughts and emotions and then choices or behaviors.
Well, I resonate a lot with what both of you already said, especially we all seem to have this intuitive sense of these three dynamics, feelings and emotions and behaviors being interrelated and forming a kind of a feedback loop. I became really interested in this feedback loop, learning about an early Buddhist teaching called dependent co-arising, and later discovered by scientists and called it operant conditioning, and now in the field of evolutionary psychology called reward-based learning. And it's also another reason why I'm really interested in the Pali language, as terms often get confused with one another and it gets difficult to be really clear about what we're talking about. So usually when I'm talking about feelings, I'm talking about just the immediate sensation of pleasure, displeasure, or neutral feelings. So a sensation, a physical sensation can be pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. A thought or a mood can be unpleasant, pleasant, or neutral. Those tend to trigger mind states, what we might call emotions. And those can fall into, according to my learned way of classifying them, 3 different classes. So there's emotions on the attractive side, on the repulsive side, and on the delusive side. So we tend to be attracted to pleasant feelings and repulsed by unpleasant feelings, and kind of ignore or are nonplussed by neutral feelings. These are all reinforced by behavior, and what is fascinating is this is actually how we learn behavior as organisms. Every organism with a nervous system learns behavior this way. So the cycle goes trigger, behavior, reward. So basically, whenever we do our behavior, it's followed by a pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral result. And if that result is pleasant, that behavior gets reinforced. And if it is unpleasant, that behavior is negatively reinforced. Let's say it makes the behavior more or less likely to happen again. This is how our hunter-gatherer ancestors learned how to find food and learned what was edible, what was toxic, how to make tools, all that. And so we're lucky that this is how our nervous system is wired, because we were able to evolve into the creatures we are today, and then build an environment around us in which this way of learning is not well suited at all. So the problem is the same feedback loop by which we learn how to survive is the same feedback loop by which we become addicted to substances, or procrastinate, or yell at a friend or spouse when we get angry. So the importance of, like Shira was saying, of being able to pause when we're feeling a trigger before we behave is really important, because that is how we break that loop and insert more agency and intention into our lives. Another way I've found very helpful in practicing is whenever I have a real salient experience of pleasure, I'll stop and ask myself, okay, what behavior did I just reinforce? Or before doing something, asking myself, is this a behavior that I want to reinforce? So one small silly way this happened recently is we live in a community, so we have a community kitchen. And one day I walked in and I was going to make myself some oatmeal for breakfast. And a community member had a bunch of friends over, and they also had oatmeal earlier for breakfast, and they left their oatmeal on the stove. And I had a very brief thought, like, oh, why don't I take some of that oatmeal? And I tend to like to make my oatmeal with a lot of maple syrup in it. It's very sweet. It hits all the pleasure buttons. So I recognize, oh, if I do that and I have that intense feeling of pleasure, I am reinforcing the behavior of taking something that wasn't given to me. And I've taken vows not to do that. So I decided, no, I should really make my own oatmeal. So the process, the relationship between feelings and emotions and behavior are how we form habits, for better or worse. And if we learn about it and can learn to study it in meditation, then we can intentionally and consciously create habits that are healthier for us and transform the unhealthy ones.
I just want to call out how awesome it is to have teachers from different backgrounds and perspectives. And it's one of the things I think is so great about Within. And I always tell my students, and I'm telling all of you who are watching this recording, take classes with all the teachers, because even when, even if we're speaking to the same thing, everyone brings their own lens to it. And you might hear something like in the way that Shira says it that just totally clicks for you, or in the way Jonathan says it, or in the way I say it. And so I just am feeling so much appreciation and celebration for you and for being a part of this community, because I think it's just really, really awesome. And the thing that I'm kind of noticing as I'm listening to you and being in this conversation with you is like, this is why, okay, when I first started meditating, my judgmenty thought was meditation looks so boring. Like you're just gonna sit and wait for something. Like, I don't know, I don't get it. That's where I started from. But what I found is it is deeply fascinating, because it's the one time where I am sitting with no other job than to just pay attention to what is my mind doing right now? What is my body feeling right now? What kind of emotions am I noticing inside right now? It's that moment of pause and that internal curiosity, and just noticing like what's happening in there. Because there's a lot, like all the time. And it's so easy to move through the world, either from habit or just reacting to things. And things really begin to shift when you have that pause and you start to ask, like, what is happening in there? Why? Like, how does this relate to all these other things? It actually became this place of creating the most loving, kind, intimate relationship with myself and my own interior world. Which brings me back to something that you both spoke to at the beginning, which is the awareness. I think Jonathan described it like the innate joy and resilience, like this internal sense. And Shira talked about inner knowing and like the inner wisdom that's beneath. I am interested in your thoughts about that part. Either like, how do you find that? If some of our students are like, I don't know, I don't know if I have that. How do I find that? How would you advise, or what would you offer to that person who's like, how do I find that in me?
I mean, well, I'll start with my personal belief is that it's through self-kindness. And I think self-kindness creates a tunnel to accessing ourselves in a way that perhaps we didn't have before. I also think meditation is a great tool for that. And so I think that a lot of us have kind of come into this world with thoughts and beliefs based on experiences that we've had in the world, habits that we've reinforced or not. And I think from that place, it's really important that we look at the way in which the thoughts that we bring to the table are our voice, are coming from ourselves and aren't coming from other people, other experiences that we've had. And how do we identify what is our voice and what is not? I think if we go back to our thinking about child development, it starts really young with, we can't know who we are unless we are mirrored back to, right? So I figure out who I am by seeing my caregiver reflect back features about me. And that is how we begin to identify ourselves. But if that was missed, if there was some way in which that was not cultivated, we often in this place of emptiness where we're like, I don't know who I am as a child, and this happens throughout our whole life, you know, we start to say, there must be something bad or wrong with me. And so that negative or that critical voice can really step in. And I think meditation can start to have you able to step outside of the thought and look in at it and say, oh, what is happening here? Okay, there are these thoughts. Whose thoughts are these? Whose voices are these? And if we can begin to cultivate a sense of tender self-compassion through a meditative practice, I utilize Kristen Neff's work around self-compassion, and her 3 steps are mindfulness. So what is it that I'm feeling right now? What's happening in this moment? The second step is a sense of common humanity or interconnectedness. How can I know that I'm not alone in this? Because shame is created in the dark. And so if we can really acknowledge that we're not alone in it, it's really valuable, and it can soften. And then from that place, offering self-kindness is the 3rd step. And I think it really opens up a tunnel to just being in the present moment with yourself and being moment to moment, breath to breath, what's happening inside of me. But sometimes our inner critic gets in the way of that. So that's how I begin to think about it.
I love that. Jonathan, how about you? How would you advise or guide a student who says, how do I connect to that inner place in me?
Well, first, by pointing out that it is an inner place. So one of the other effects of this reward-based learning cycle I was talking about is that we learn how to cope with stress by going outside and looking for some pleasant sight or sound or smell or taste or sensation. And those might give us some temporary relief, but it can also compound the stress that we were seeking to escape in the first place, or at best, just be a temporary relief, since it's impermanent, and the pleasure that we get from it becomes, the dopamine receptors eventually become satiated, and we need to find something else. So it's first by realizing there's nowhere outside to go that will be a truly satisfying and lasting way to cope with stress. So we need to find something inner. And even though that inner place is unconditioned and not dependent, there is a method that we can follow, at least to discover that it's, you see my bunny? She's one for me. Anyways, that we can use to discover that it is inside and go back to. And so that method for me, and the one that I like to teach the most, is called mindfulness, or the 4 establishments of mindfulness. And for me, it starts by following an awareness of my breath into my body. So this refuge for me is called mindfulness immersed in the body. And it's a way of tapping into this field of energy that is here and now, and detaching somewhat from getting caught up in the sensual realm, in calming the attachment and aversion responses that happen at sense contact, and instead just developing a peaceful abiding in my body, where it's calm and peaceful, but at the same time very alive and full of energy. So yeah, I teach guided meditations for accessing that state, followed by beginning by focusing on the breath, and then asking yourself, what would be the most comfortable way to breathe right now? Because there's a lot of habit energy wrapped up in the way that we breathe. We have to kind of unlearn. So you're just allowing yourself to breathe comfortably, and then to kind of build a perception of that breath filling up the whole body. And so there we have this other sense besides the 5 that I've talked about so far called proprioception, just the fact that you can feel your body in space, that you can sense its position, you can feel the outer edges of your body, you can feel internal to your body. If you can develop enough concentration to sit and be in that state, and then the discernment to be able to kind of just keep at least one foot there in daily life, then you have like a solid ground to stand on no matter what's going on around you. And you no longer need to go searching for sensual pleasures or other ways to cope with stress, because you have that stillness inside you.
Thank you for that. And I'm seeing, well, one thing too that stands out listening to you both is the sense that there is a process, right? Like you can break it down into steps, and that it is about becoming more present and aware of what you're experiencing in the moment, and bringing that gentle inquiry, that kindness, that self-compassion, and having it there right with you. So we had a question in the chat. What are the first steps to get rid of beliefs that don't serve you any longer and are deeply rooted within you? So my take on that is, if there's a belief that you're holding, the hardest part is to understand why you're holding it. Like, why is it still there? On some level, there's a part of you that agrees with it or that is afraid of letting it go because it's been effective in some way in your life. Sometimes that awareness is the hardest part for us to see, because it's almost just like in the background of our lives. And this is where that real deep inquiry or partnering or journaling, like anything that helps you see it more clearly, is the first step. And I would even question characterizing it as it's deeply rooted. Like, just like Jonathan was saying, we have this sense like something's here and it's been here forever, but actually we're recreating it every moment. So one way to think about it is, it's only there because I've practiced it a lot. Like, I've just practiced believing this thing, and I've practiced it for years. I wasn't even doing it consciously. I just kept agreeing with it, and it was mirrored back to me that it was valuable. And so I just kept it, right? So one is that self-compassion of, oh yeah, I've just practiced this belief a lot. So of course it's the easiest thing for my brain to do. So compassion first, rather than going into battle. Like, I have to unroot this. I have to get rid of it. The willingness to really meet and accept yourself. This is who I am. This is where I am. These are the thoughts that I have. And rather than going to battle against yourself, bringing all that compassion that Shira was pointing to, all of that kindness, like, wow, I am a human. And of course I have some thoughts and beliefs that I've held for a long time. And of course I've outgrown them, but I still tend to keep them. Let's find out why, is a big part of that, because you're really only like one choice away from things being different. You're only one thought away from things being different. You're only one moment away from making a different choice, from, instead of reinforcing that belief, getting curious, well, what would happen? What would it be like if that wasn't true? Or if I chose this instead? That's always available, which is why when you're making big changes, it happens from the smallest moments. It's not like you have to overcome all of this. It's like it right now, you only have this right now moment. So bringing the compassion, the awareness, the presence, starting to soften and open kind of that knot of belief with some curiosity, is all part of how to do that. That's how I do it in my own practice, and how I help my students and clients with that. What do y'all think, Jonathan and Shira? What are the first steps to get rid of beliefs that don't serve you any longer, especially if you've had them for a really long time?
Well, I think my line of my profession, my line of work tends to go towards looking at where it began. Where did this belief, where did it originate? And so that's one way you can look at it. And I think, but I think if we, if on a broader level, I think if you, again, pause, similar to what we've kind of all been saying, I think if we can pause and provide the space of ease and peace inside of ourselves, and part of that is through meditation, I think is a really valuable tool, especially mindfulness practice is a very, Vipassana, right, means insight. And the reason for that is because you're cultivating a foundation for truth to come through, not thoughts and beliefs, but you might learn those thoughts and beliefs that help you to understand why it's deeply rooted inside of you. So I think, I think the first step is to really pause and to do some meditation, to do some mindfulness practice to soothe, because I think about things in terms of the nervous system response. And, when we are deeply rooted in something, we often feel the reaction. We feel that trigger, right? And it's immediate. And in that place, we often are in a dysregulated nervous system response. And so in order to soothe our nervous system, to be able to even comprehend, like, executive functioning doesn't exist when we're in a triggered state. So in order to be able to bring that online, it's really important that we can kind of soften and really see what's happening in the moment for us. I think when you're not in that triggered state, that's when you can do a little bit more self-inquiry around journaling, or seeing a therapist or a coach, or talking with people, your friends, family, about it. But I think when you're in that triggered state, when you're like in that reactionary response, is a time for you to really pause and to find meditation, find your breath, find your seat in your chair, reconnect to yourself in a grounded way.
Something I want to add too that you just made me think of is that, like, we have a bias for things that are familiar. We tend to prefer things that are familiar because they feel safe, because they feel known. And that means even if it's something unpleasant, if it's familiar, like, we will invest in our coping mechanisms rather than finding ways to change it, because change often feels scary because it is unfamiliar. So even though your, high functioning intellectual brain is like, no, like, that is not a great choice for me. I've outgrown that, choice or that belief or behavior, but I still keep doing it. And we think it's like an information gap, or we think it's a motivation gap, when really what might be happening is your brain is just like, I know how to cope with this, problem. So I'll stay here because I know how to do that. And if I make anything different or change, like, I don't know what that is. And that feels scary because it's unknown. So sometimes I find that itself can just bring a little bit more compassion of like, oh, of course, it's not like I'm not smart. If you've read all of these books and you've been meditating for years and you're like, why am I still stuck with this? Like, why can I not get past this? Sometimes just seeing the relationship as, oh, like, my brain is always trying to solve for my safety. And on one level, the familiar feels safe, even if it's a familiar that I don't like, oddly enough.
I would add a little something else, and that is to become curious about what is reinforcing that belief. So in my life, I've struggled before with some negative self-perception about my ability in certain things, and then that perception would lead to a feeling of anxiety. That anxiety would lead to a coping behavior, say getting lost in YouTube, and then I wouldn't accomplish what I wanted to accomplish, and then my belief that I couldn't accomplish things got reinforced. So it's really important for me to ask myself, what will this belief lead me to do or not do? And will that take me to where I want to go? Another thing that's been helpful is say I know what the trigger is and I know what the coping strategy is. I just will imagine myself engaging in that coping strategy. And then I'll ask myself, is it that good? Like, is it really worth escaping there? And when I'm not absorbed in it, it's very clear. It's like, oh no, like I don't actually enjoy it that much. And then I'll also imagine, say when the absorption wears off and I'm moving on from that coping strategy, just asking myself, okay, now what? Now I'm right back to where I was. So it really takes all of the pleasure out of the coping strategy, whatever is, because a belief doesn't serve you because it's leading you to do something that you don't want to do, really. So it's taking whatever reward out of that thing is what changes it. And then finding ways to reinforce the beliefs that you do want to cultivate, that do help you accomplish and do the things that you want to do. One of the interesting things about whenever the Buddha would outline the full path, the first step was always finding good friends. So ever since we were adolescents, our main sources of reinforcement is our peer group. And chances are, if you have long-term beliefs that are not serving you well, it might have something to do with the reinforcement that you're getting from the people around you. So especially, if things are, very toxic, definitely do your best to not hang around people who reinforce toxic beliefs, and instead seek out the people who are really able to showcase the kinds of qualities that you admire and want to cultivate for yourself, and seek them out as friends and mentors, so that you're getting the kind of positive reinforcement that helps you grow in the way that you want to.
Just really quick, I'll just add one piece that came to me as Jonathan was speaking, and I really resonated with what both of you said. I think it can be helpful as a part of mindfulness to just name, this is a moment of suffering, right? This is a moment where there is an experience that doesn't feel sweet or soft or gentle. And to be able to just acknowledge that and to offer kindness to yourself around that place can create that space for you to be able to look inward. And I love the idea of like reinforcing the patterns, like positive reinforcement. Like I got a puppy a year and a half ago, and she is so good. And I think the reason is she's so good is because I'm the best parent in the world. But aside from that, I think it's also because we do so much positive reinforcement. Any of the bad behaviors, we will acknowledge it and set a boundary. But outside of that, we're just constantly reinforcing the good behaviors and what good behaviors look like for you. And I don't want to just hold this binary around it, but really is to consider, what does my body feel like when I do this? What does my heart feel like when I do this? What is good for me? What is helpful for me? And if you know that there's a deeply rooted belief that's not helpful for you, I do think it's important to just consistently be opening space around it and to offer kindness to yourself. That's the first step, is to say, like, can I be kind to myself around this belief?
I love it. We just have a few minutes left, and I want to share just so much appreciation for the richness of the conversation, for all of the insight and the wisdom and the encouragement that has just, I felt, come pouring through all of our teachers here today. And yeah, any final thoughts as we wrap up? There was like one final word of guidance that you would offer? And I'll kick us off because I actually have one in mind. So my offer of guidance is kindness first, and all thoughts are optional. And the more you can see that, the more interesting your life gets.
I'll just share that acknowledging your pain does not make you weak, and that acknowledging that your thoughts are not necessarily fact is kind of the first step to breaking free in some way from them.
Oh, and I think I would just want to encourage everyone to believe in themselves. You know, you have the same nervous system and biology in mind that everyone else who has ever managed to heal their trauma or realize some amazing inner quality. There's nothing that separates you from those people. So when it gets difficult, yeah, find the ways to relax and bring yourself some inner joy, and believe that you can keep doing it.
Thank you to all of our teachers. Thank you to our community. Thank you for being here. And we look forward to seeing you in the future, either in a class or knowing that you're watching the recordings. Thanks, everybody.
Well, I suppose I can. That's okay.
Yeah, please.